Welcome to this extended bite-sized learning presentation, which we've called Rethinking Occupational Therapy in Social Care, shifting from the incremental approach to home adaptations for sustainable impact. My name is Dr. Rachel Russell and I'm the Senior Regional Advisor at Foundations, and we are, on behalf of the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, the National Advisory Body for the Disabled Facilities Grant and for home improvement agencies, including local authority adaptation services. So the reason we're discussing this today is because much of government policy and the drivers within health and social care delivery is about ensuring people get timely access to solutions that can help them better manage their health and social care needs as they get older or as they're dealing with the impact of long-term conditions. So to prevent, reduce or delay health and social care needs developing, we need to use strategies to help people be more resilient to the changes that occur as they age or experience the physical, sensory and cognitive impact from long-term conditions. When we look at other areas of industry, for example, aeronautics, engineers don't wait for things to go wrong with an aeroplane as it ages. They build in redundant systems. So if a primary system fails on an aeroplane due to age, there are backup systems that can take over, minimising the risk of something catastrophic happening and ensuring the aircraft continues to operate safely. So do we currently use the right approach, or is there an opportunity to think about how we use the home environment more effectively as a backup system as people experience the sensory, cognitive, motor changes through the aging process or from the impact of long-term conditions? So is there an opportunity to use adaptations provided through the Disabled Facilities Grant, for example, as a redundant system and to prevent something catastrophic happening, such as a fall in a bathroom, or reducing the impact if something does go wrong? So this is the Rockwood Frailty Scale, and I'm using it to argue that what we need to be using are approaches such as equipment, assistive technology and adaptations provided through the Disabled Facilities Grant to prevent or slow down the progression of disability or frailty. And by doing this, we can keep people in their own homes for longer, and we can reduce and delay the need for more formal care and support. So are we using the right strategies? From our experience at Foundations, we'd argue that the majority of local authorities that we work done, they tend to use what we call the incremental approach. So they start off with advice. When that stops working, the person comes back to social care, leads to another assessment that leads to recommendations of simple equipment. Again, once that stops working, the person comes back to social care. Then more complex equipment might be put in, and then finally there might be recommendations for a Disabled Facilities Grant for more complex adaptations. We call this the patch as we go approach. So we're waiting for problems to arise rather than being proactive and taking a much more preventative approach. We're not building in redundant systems. So with this incremental approach, we're not preventing or delaying social care input because we're having to keep coming back to that individual, or the individual has to keep coming back to social care for input. And we often have to put in a care package because of the delays with the DFG. And often that then means it's difficult to withdraw that care package once the adaptations have gone in. And evidence shows that the longer we delay adaptations for older and disabled people, they can often experience a loss of confidence and agency, which is then difficult to regain once the adaptations are put in for that individual. So is there a different approach to the incremental approach? Well, yes, there is. And on this slide is the model that's taken from the HARP programme. The HARP is a fall preventions programme, and those that deliver this service argue that it provides a more sustainable approach because it starts with architectural changes rather than architectural changes being the end point. So architectural changes such as a wet room is that redundant system that an aeronautical engineer might recommend if they were designing a bathroom. The other benefit over other interventions that we might provide as occupational therapists is that people can perhaps forget our advice. They might, for motivational reasons, stop exercising, or they might not take medication or forget to take medication, or they actually might remove equipment or stop using equipment. But what they can't do easily is take out any architectural changes that we may have put in as a preventative measure. I thought it might be useful just to think about why we might also use this incremental approach. And I think what we have to remember is, as occupational therapists in England, where we practice and our roles and responsibilities within services is often defined by how services are actually commissioned. Hospital discharge and rehab services traditionally are commissioned by the NHS, whereas long-term needs such as adaptations, because of the legislation and policy, tends to be commissioned through obviously social care. And as part of that, it means that when somebody may have been identified for adaptations within the rehab process, then often those cases are then handed over to social care. So our rehab approach tends not to start with architectural changes. It tends to address the rehab needs and behavioural changes. There's also another problem with our approach to commissioning, which is that it tends to mean that occupational therapists then work in silos of practice. So we tend to pass on cases between services. So rehab teams tend to deal with low-level equipment and adaptations, and then once those have been exhausted, that's when they'll refer over to our social care colleagues. So for the older person or the person with a long-term condition needing a solution, it can feel a little bit like this image, where their needs and issues are passed on from one service to another, rather than thinking about actually what does the system need to look like to enable the best journey for that person to get the solution that they need to address the issues that they're having within their home environment. The good news is that there are opportunities ahead for us as occupational therapists in England to change those silos of practice that occur in some areas. And this is because of the new intermediate care framework, which is also backed up by the recently published Royal College of Occupational Therapists workforce strategy, which has very similar messages. So those key messages are that we need to streamline what we do, and we need to think about the journey to the solution for that person who needs a solution. And we need to avoid handoffs between health OTs and OTs in social care. To do that, we need to think about how we work across systems. We need to think about how we work pan-professionally and look at pan-professional development, not just between health and social care colleagues, but also with housing colleagues as well. And we need to implement those recommendations from Adaptations without delay, and ensure that social care and OTs working in housing, that they're involved in those cases that require their specialist knowledge, and that we're not just referring cases to them just because it's likely to involve a disabled facilities grant. Some of these workforce changes could feel that it's challenging our professional identity, and it's important to remember that workforce and system changes is not about letting go of what is professionally important to us. Instead, it's thinking differently about how we hold our professional identity. It's about us thinking about how we use our knowledge creatively to think how we currently do things, and doing things differently so that we can provide a much more person-centred approach to what we do as occupational occupational therapists. So we've looked at what we do as occupational therapists, but the other elephant in the room is how adaptations are funded and what the Disabled Facility Grant can and can't do. The DFG is a fantastic resource for funding adaptations, but it was never designed to provide adaptations that can be installed to provide a preventative approach or to provide those adaptations that we might want to use as a backup or redundant system. And I've illustrated this by going back to the legislation itself. So this statement on this slide is taken from the legislation itself. And what we can see is that to actually apply for a grant, the relevant person who needs the adaptation has to have substantial impairment. So crudely put, it implies that things have to be going wrong for that individual before they can actually access the Disabled Facilities Grant. Now, in some areas, they are being forward-thinking and they're using the housing assistance policy, which allows flexibility in terms of how the DFG allocation is used to provide more preventative adaptations, which is really positive to see. So in this extended presentation, I hope I've given a different perspective in terms of how the Disabled Facilities Grant and adaptations can be used as a preventative tool, using adaptations as redundant systems in the home environment to support people as they age or experience changes that occur through having a long-term condition. However, I've also explored some of the challenges with our own professional practice and how our services are commissioned in England that might prevent that from happening, alongside some of the challenges of using the DFG as a preventative tool, as it was never designed to do that in terms of a legislative perspective. So I want you to think about, are you using and recommending adaptations, and are you using the right approach? Please visit our foundation's website where you can find further information on how we can support you and your services.